We are Irish Side of the Moon. Freedom of information, personal empowerment. The Irish Side of the Moon.
I still have a dream.
There are many sources of energy available.
Everything is energy. My God, do we need this war? Free our mind.
Corporations have taken over the world.
Freedom of information, personal empowerment. The Irish Side of the Moon.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Irish Side of the Moon. My name is Shane Harrison and I am your host for this week's show. Before we get stuck into it, I would like to say a big thank you to Mary Holland. Mary was our guest last week. Mary, it's fair to say, would be an advocate of choice when it comes to vaccinations, the freedom to choose. She was on discussing the book Vaccine Epidemic, and you can check out Mary's website at www.vaccineepidemic.com. That's www.vaccineepidemic.com. We've done a few shows on this subject in the past. We've also had Dr. Andrew Wakefield on in the recent past and discussing his own work in the field of vaccinations and a possible link to autism. So yeah, good show and well worth checking out the website and the book Vaccine Epidemic. Now, for anybody listening to us for the first time and maybe listening around the world, I would encourage you to check out irishsideofthemoon.blogspot.com. That's irishsideofthemoon.blogspot.com. There you'll find a back catalogue of all our previous shows, totaling 70 odd at the moment. And you'll find subjects varying from vaccines and medicine and health and alternative health right through to monetary system, to UFOs, aliens, you name it. We've covered it all. Crop circles. Also, I would encourage you to check us out on Facebook, www.facebook.com/Irish Side of the Moon, or just when you're on Facebook, do a search for Irish Side of the Moon. There you can like us, and I would encourage you to get all your friends to like us as well. There's ongoing posts, and there's a right old community building up now. You can participate, you can comment on posts, and you can also, a good way to reach out to us and suggest topics you'd like us to cover, maybe that we haven't covered so far, or maybe have guests on who you think would fall into the vein of what we do. Okay, so that's enough of the shameless plugs. Now to this week's guest. I'm delighted to say I'm joined on the phone by Dr. Bob Blaine. Bob has a PhD in sociology and was a professor at the University of Illinois. Bob has authored and co-authored many books and articles, amongst them Weaving Golden Threads of Sociology Theory, Toward World Cooperation, and A Critique of Parsons' Four-Function Paradigm. For a long number of years, Bob has been a vocal activist in trying to bring about monetary and economical reform, and is an advocate for setting up a global standard for the value of money. Like a mile or a kilometre is the exact same distance in every country and in every language, so too, according to Bob, we should have a fixed measurement for the value of money. Bob has travelled around the world presenting his theory of money and economics. You can check out his website at www.ourmoney.org. That's www.ourmoney.org. Bob, welcome to the show. How are you this evening?
I'm fine. Good to be on the show with you, Shane.
And it's fantastic to have you, Bob. It's fantastic to have you. I've been looking at your stuff for the last couple of months. When it comes to Irish Side of the Moon, I suppose I'd be the person that would be most engaged in the whole economics and the whole monetary system. And I've been looking at money systems over the years. So I was really intrigued by your system because I have looked at time banking in the past and I've seen some limitations, but the way you present your version of it, it really intrigued me. So I was delighted that you actually said you could join us to do an interview on the show. But before we jump into money and economics, I would first like to spend a few minutes discussing Bob Blaine, the person. So to start off with, Bob, can you share with the listeners a bit more about your early life and I suppose the path that led you first into sociology and from there into monetary reform?
Okay. I taught at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville, not the University of Illinois, just to correct that.
Okay.
I grew up I grew up in Holyoke, Massachusetts. It was the first planned industrial city in the United States, and I'm just now studying a lot about it and realizing how fortunate I was to be there. I grew up Catholic, French Catholic, and I started off in a French school, but ended up with the Irish school. So talking to you in Ireland is kind of like going home. St. Jerome Catholic School, went through that, and I was an altar boy and a Boy Scout, and I went into seminary for 1 year in just outside of Albany, New York. I was looking into the possibility of becoming a priest, and I decided not to do that. Instead, I went the secular route, and when I discovered sociology, I knew nothing about it. The first time it was mentioned to me, it was brand new. But I realized that that was a way to continue what I had learned, which was to concentrate on figuring out ways for people to get along. I'm from a family of 7 children. I'm the first boy. I have an older sister. And then there are 4 other boys and another girl. So we grew up sharing. And, you know, the Jesus Christ was always, I loved his parables, the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, all those things. And I tried to pursue those things. And I worked my way through the education system, not really knowing very much about it, but I kind of did it step by step and ended up going through the entire hierarchy. I have an associate's degree from Community College in Holyoke. I have a bachelor's from the University of Massachusetts. I have a master's from Harvard, a PhD from the University of Massachusetts. Then the experience at Harvard, I was studying under Talcott Parsons, who was a world-renowned, internationally famous sociologist who had a PhD in economics and had come into sociology because he thought that the economists were neglecting values. And so I first became interested in the economic stuff. Actually, I got interested in developing a general theory, which is what Parsons was trying to do. And in that process, I learned that you could compare spoken language with written language, the first spoken language being very rich in meaning, carrying a large volume of information from person to person. And then writing carries less information, but it carries it a longer distance because it's durable. Well, having made that comparison, I was led by a suggestion by Parsons that money is a medium of communication. So I began to investigate it from that point of view and came to realize that it doesn't have a definition. The units that we use for our currencies, I understand in Ireland it's the euro, in the United States it's the dollar, and then we have all these other names all over the world for currencies, but none of them are defined. So in exploring that, I came to understand that we needed to have a unit, and the one that I ended up realizing is the proper one is time. So ever since then, I have been promoting the hour as the world money unit. Just as we have a meter, which is the same everywhere in the world, we would use time, the hour, as our basic unit of price. And everyone in the world would be paid by the hour, which we are, except that the money doesn't say so. We need to say it on the money.
Okay.
Now there's all, yeah. You have a question?
Yeah, just before we go a wee bit further on the money end of things, so outside of Professor Parson, who else would you say had an early influence on you in terms of your views on economics and money? Was it primarily him, or had you other influences as well?
The key book was written by a retired dentist.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called Money, Bona Fide and Non-Bona-Fide by Popp is his last name, P-O-P-P. It was a self-published book, and I was looking for an understanding of money, and I wasn't quite getting it because I wasn't finding anything helpful in the economics books. And in that little paperback, by Edward Popp. He describes a hired man being working for a farmer, and the farmer has no pay for him, no money. So he gives him a note that promises him potatoes as payment. And the hired man takes the note, gives it to his barber, gives it to a grocer, and he's able to get his services met with this note. And then the grocer takes the note to the farmer and collects the potatoes. So here was the influence of that note as a medium of communication. And the other big influence was George Knapp, K-N-A-P-P. He published in 1928, he was a German, The State Theory of Money, in which he talks about money as similar to a postage stamp, which is a certification that you pay to have the letter carried, or it's similar to a metal disc you might get if you check your coat at a restaurant. They give you the token which says that you have a right to your coat. Well, that's what money is. Money is a token that we have a right to be paid. We say we are paid when we receive money, but we're not actually paid until we spend the money and are paid in goods and services. So money is, if you think of a money transaction as involving three people, call them A, B, and C, B does work for A. A gives B money. B takes the money to C, who then pays B. So the money is meant to communicate from A to C about B. Once we understand that, the next step is just realizing that for B to be paid properly, fairly, honestly, the money must tell C what B deserves to be paid.
Yes, yes.
That's where I can do it.
Okay, and I suppose too, coming from a big family, I suppose Ireland's renowned for having big families, especially maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago. It would have been, it wouldn't have been rare to have families with maybe 10, 12, maybe 14 in a family. That kind of grounds people because I suppose some people would have the perception that the more that there is, and especially in poor countries like Ireland was back in, say, in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, that the more people would fight. But it's actually quite the opposite. People do tend to cooperate a lot more and share a lot more.
Absolutely. The first course I took when I got out of the seminary was in economics. And on the very first day, the instructor said, there's scarcity. Therefore, we must compete for what there is. I immediately raised my hand. I said, if there's scarcity, why can't we share and figure out how to produce more? Because that's exactly how I grew up. And he looked at me like I was from outer space. He did not like that question at all. But it was the critical question. It's right at the beginning, the economists make that error by saying the problem is scarcity. And I've learned that the problem is not scarcity. The problem is entropy. Entropy is decay, disorganization, decline, disintegration. And to deal with entropy, the proper action is cooperation, not competition. And,
yes.
I learned that from my family.
Exactly, but what you'll find, like in terms of modern economics, there's a lot of economists that push the theory that it's the scarcity that gives money its value, and I don't believe in that at all. But if you look at all modern systems, they all work upon the same principles of scarcity, and a lot of people would argue that it's deliberately so. It keeps people, it keeps people in the rat race for most of their life. Your life's passed you by. You're competing for this. You're competing for that. Your cogs in a wheel, really.
Yeah, it's anti-social.
Yep.
It's anti-Christian. It's anti-human. We get along by getting along. When you're having to compete, look at the mess in the world. I don't like hearing people say we need to be more competitive. I'd much rather than say we need to be more cooperative. We live on a planet that Bucky Fuller who invented the geodesic dome, he described it as spaceship Earth. And we need to get along here. And the economists, unfortunately, they're so locked in to this scarcity paradigm. There's some modification in it. If you look at a very recent economics textbook, they shy away from using the word scarcity. They use the word limit. Things are limited. And I think there's a subconscious recognition that scarcity isn't the place to start. But having changed to the word limit, they still use the same argument that you have to compete for what there is because it's limited. Instead of saying we need to use what there is efficiently and effectively. And the best way to do that is to cooperate. Things don't get done by people competing. Competition is wonderful if you're playing soccer or, as you say, football. Those games are wonderful, but what they do is they improve people's competence, people's skill. And that's what the word competition came originally from the word competent, meaning to overcome obstacles together.
Yeah, we done an interview last year with a guy called David Bloom, and David's very much into different forms of fuel instead of using petroleum and stuff like that. They're into eco fuels. But a big part of what he does is permaculture as well, and looking at how ecosystems work and that. And he told us in his interview that this whole thing going back to Darwinism, survival of the fittest, it was never actually Darwin that came up with that. It was a politician of that time, of that era, reading some of Darwin's work, coined the term survival of the fittest, which is accepted today. That's the way the world works.
Yes, it probably was Herbert Spencer.
It was yes, I couldn't think on the name, that's correct.
Yes. It's a shame that has happened. I just want to see us get along in the world, and we've had opportunities after World War II. There was a wonderful opportunity there. There's a speech given by Franklin Roosevelt. Actually, he didn't deliver it because he wasn't well at the time, but it's a beautiful one at the founding of the Bretton Woods International Monetary Fund. It's a beautiful speech that says we learn to cooperate in war. This is now the test to see if we will cooperate in peace. Unfortunately, the United States and Great Britain used that opportunity to control the world and the world's monetary system through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, when they really should have created a banking system that would have promoted cooperation. And I think John Maynard Keynes was much closer to getting it right than the Harry Dexter White of the United States. The United States was intent. We'd won the war, so we thought we had. And it would have been so much better had we thought in terms of making a monetary system that was good for the entire world. Instead, here we've continued this competition, this conflict, and here we are today, so many years later, when everyone could have a high standard of living throughout the world. There's enough for everyone on Earth.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. More than enough. We're having abundance. Now, I'm going to start moving into the money system. And I'm going to start off, for example, I'm going to go back to the 70s. In 71, Nixon dropped the gold standard. Now, I would say the largest majority of money reformists out there today believe in pegging currency to gold or to other precious metals. What is your opinion on using, say, gold as a standard?
The problem is that money needs to communicate. And if you were to offer me gold, I wouldn't have a clue as to how much would be fair. And that's the problem. Money, just like the meter is a length that everyone can see. Gold is a metal that only gold experts really know. And it has, it certainly is extremely limited. You could say gold is scarce. And tying the money system to gold doesn't help at all. It has the opposite effect. It keeps money scarce when there's nothing to prevent us from producing money, creating money when we need it. The use of gold comes from the historical evolution of money, which was out of using commodities as an intermediate step in exchange. But we don't need commodities. We need communication with our money. And I think we miss a wonderful opportunity to put things on our money. When you look at the symbols that are on money, every country tries to put things on there that are inspiring to its people. Significant leaders of the country, resources that the country has, a name that signifies wealth and well-being. But what they need to do is to follow through with that. And I think every money in the world would do well to say directly on it a very simple thing: share the work, share the wealth.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Absolutely.
what we need. There's so many people who think that the way to get rich is to not work, but to invest your money in something that's going to just pay you forever. Work is what produces wealth. We need to encourage work, and we need to pay people well for the work they do.
Absolutely. Now, before we go on to your hypothesis of how the money system should work, or more accurately, how you propose money should have a universal measurement of value, can you first explain how the current system works, how different currencies derive their value, and how we work out these values when exchanging different currencies?
Well, it's the way it would work, I suppose, if there were no clocks in the world. If there were no clocks, you and I would never be able to have made this connection, because here I am sitting in Illinois and you are in Ireland, and we were able to precisely schedule this interview because you have a clock and I have a clock. We have different time zones, but we were able to work that out, and here we are. So without a clock, we would be guessing. And that's how the value of money is determined for most people. However, the control of the money is in the hands of private bankers whose goal is to get more, always get more. The biggest market in the world is the trading of currencies, and they're engaged in guesswork. They're trying, they're making money on small ups and downs on the value of currencies. You don't see a market for the meter. There's not the meter going up and down, getting longer and shorter. We need to follow the example of the metric system, not guessing, trial and error. If we were doing everything else we do with trial and error, nothing would work. At least it wouldn't work very well. Our cars wouldn't run. We'd be having our electricity go off unpredictably if it ever arrived. Every time we plug something into a socket, we'd be worried something would blow up, and it probably would, because there'd be no precision. Precision is the key to doing things effectively and efficiently. Where we lack accuracy is with money. And that's what it's like the last bastion of inaccuracy and guesswork. And I believe when we get it right, so many problems are just going to vanish. We'll have all the old problems. We'll still get sick. We'll still die. We'll still have to figure out how to make things that we need to satisfy our lives. But we won't have all these money problems. They're really crazy in the world today.
Isn't it just that, fair enough, if you have lack of resources, if you have lack of, say, oil, or you have lack of precious metals to produce certain electronic components today, that's one thing. But the crazy thing is today, the fact that the man-made part of it, this medium of exchange, is the thing that we're scarce of. It's not resources to a degree, and of course we need to change how we use resources, and we need to become a lot more efficient with them, but it just boggles the mind, Bob, when you think about it. The man-made part of the whole thing, is the part that stops hospitals, stops children from being educated. It's just crazy. It's ludicrous.
It is. It is. And I do believe that economics should be so simple and so clear that children understand it. You can teach the metric system to children. You can teach the Copernican conception of the universe to children, although the Ptolemaic conception was a whole lot more complicated.
Yes.
If you look at economics today, it is so complicated. Great big heavy textbooks for introduction to economics. You end up graduating that course, and they'll tell you, well, you may not understand it yet, but you'll take another course and get a PhD. You try to read journals that economists publish today, the most sophisticated mathematician would have trouble deciphering what it all means. That's a sign that they've lost touch with their basic job, which is to teach every one of us in the simplest terms how to behave cooperatively with one another so we can produce what we need, be kind, and be good shepherds of the earth, and leave it better than we found it for
Absolutely.
our children.
Absolutely agree again with that. I think there was a saying from some of the economists back in the 60s or the 70s that only in the world of banking is the complexity used to take you away from the truth as opposed to, reveal the truth. I'm paraphrasing somewhat.
Yeah, they've stripped values out of their thinking. There's an example that Paul Samuelson uses. He was an MIT professor. He published 11 editions of his economics textbook, probably taught millions of people with it, got himself rich. He says, sometimes a rich man's dog receives the milk that a poor man's child needs to avoid rickets. But that's not a problem of economics. If it bothers you, take it over to philosophy and ethics, and you can talk about it over there. I paraphrased the last part.
Yes.
It makes me angry every time I hear that. How can you justify an economics that leaves children with rickets?
Yeah.
And he just passes over it. And, when someone like me talks to an economist, they look at me like I'm some kind of a weirdo, or bleeding heart. Oh, you must be an idealist. I'm talking about the world as it really is, and it's pretty nasty out there. Yeah, it's pretty nasty, and you make it nasty by teaching what you teach. You need to teach people that we live well by working together and sharing what we produce. Share the work, share the wealth. That's where the incentive needs to be. Not an incentive that gives CEOs of companies hundreds of millions of dollars while people are losing their homes because they can't pay the interest on their mortgages.
Yep. I seen a quote there recently. I'm going to paraphrase it. It was regarding human beings and that we're intellectual beings and we understand. But if you look at the way the world actually works, like you have in America at the moment, you have Obama, who was given a Nobel Peace Prize, but yet last year he spent I think it was 760 odd billion on his military budget. It's, the world today is the complete opposite of what what we're taught, what it's supposed to be in terms of setting standards to reach and to strive for. If you look at what we have the complete opposite in place. I mean, you have the West, for example, suffering from conditions like cancer and obesity and heart because of overabundance. And then you have the third world suffering from hunger. It just doesn't make sense. And people seem to accept the status quo of that's the way it has to be and that's the only way it can be.
Yes. And if you look at currency exchange rates, you can see why it is that way. The third world's currencies are undervalued. The first world's currencies are overvalued. So we're buying the resources from poor countries that they need for their own people. And what is happening is, as you said, overabundance. I mean, people are throwing valuable things away because they just have too much. This whole scarcity argument just flies in the face of reality because we don't have a scarcity problem in the United States. Now, there are poor people, and they have a scarcity problem in the United States. But as a whole, we have too much.
Yep.
One of the most disturbing things to me was when the Twin Towers were attacked and collapsed, the advice they gave us in this country was to go shopping because they were afraid the economy would slow down. I mean, that tells you there's something fundamentally wrong. You mentioned the war expense, the military budget in the United States. In a way, it's a shame that the United States, quote, won World War II, because what it did was reinforce this military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned us about. We're still fighting World War II. Our military machinery, the technology, is the kind of thing that is more advanced and sophisticated, but very similar to the conditions in World War II. And our people, some of our people, are preparing for the next war. Oh my God, this is awful. We need to prepare for peace, and you don't do that with weapons. I think what happened with Obama is, he was very well intentioned, but once he got into office, he was immediately surrounded by people talking war. I'm reading Bob Woodward's book, Obama's Wars, and that's exactly what happened. Bush sent two people to brief Obama on what was happening in Afghanistan, and the condition was Obama had to be alone with these two other people. And that was a signal that they were framing the story of the way that they wanted Obama to think about it. And I thought he missed a wonderful opportunity. He should have come forward and said, war is wrong. The attack on Afghanistan was wrong. The attack on Iraq was wrong. The attack on the Twin Towers was wrong. And let's go get to the bottom of these things. There's a wonderful book called Three Cups of Tea by Greg Mortensen. Here's a fellow who was a mountain climber. He got lost in the Himalayas, and he stumbled into a village up there, and the villager saved his life. He found out that they needed a school, and it's a long story. It's a good book. I won't tell you the whole story, but later on in his experience, after he built like 50 schools, he went into the Taliban area and visited with them, and he had them come to one of his schools, and afterwards they invited him to come in there and build them a school, but on one condition, that it have a playground. A playground. They loved the playground at the school that he showed them. Oh, and I'll tell you one other quick experience. My son Brian and I were in Libya in 2006 for the 9th Provisional World Parliament meeting, because the Provisional World Parliament endorsed the hour as the World Money Unit. They did so in 2004 when they were meeting in India. So my son and I went to Libya to support the Parliament. Well, it happened to be the 20th anniversary of the attack by the United States on Libya, including Gaddafi's home. And we went to Gaddafi's home on that night. And I was worried because here I have my 18-year-old son with me, and I'm thinking, we got tags on that say we're from the United States. What are people going to think? Well, it was a lot that altered my thinking about Libya as a result of that meeting. But the key thing was after Gaddafi's daughter tells us about her experience, because she was a little girl at the time, the attack killed Hannah, a 2-year-old adopted daughter of Gaddafi.
That's right,
After she tells us the story, Lionel Richie came on stage, and it totally transformed the whole atmosphere. All of a sudden, people were smiling. They knew the words to his songs. And I thought to myself, this is the kind of moment we need in the world where we change from thinking you're going to get anything by killing other people to those things that people need and want: water, food, music, housing, education. Look at how much better off we'd have been if we'd have done that, 100 years ago, before World War One. Certainly in the interim period when we were being so, that Treaty of Versailles was so unkind to the Germans. It set the conditions for World War II. We're not getting anything out of war. We're only making enemies, and that's regardless of what side you're fighting on. And
Yeah, that's right,
yeah.
because Germany in the First World War, after it was over, they went into like hyperinflation and stuff like that, and there was heavy taxes put onto the country, which I believe today they're still paying off or have just paid off in the last maybe 12 months.
Yeah, I didn't know that. But if you want to read a good book about that, John Maynard Keynes, The Economic Consequences of the Peace. It was published, I think, in 1928. He was at the negotiations, and he left in disgust when he realized that they were not, the Germans had no part in setting the conditions of that treaty. And the representatives from Germany, when they were confronted with those terms, they said, whoever signs this treaty signs the death warrant for millions of German men, women, and children. Not only was it the death warrant for German men, women, and children, but for people all over the world. That was the Treaty of Versailles, and it gave Hitler what he needed. Whenever he wanted to get the German people angry, all he had to do was bring up the Treaty of Versailles.
Yes.
We created Hitler. It's just such a shame that we continue to do it, and we're continuing to do it in the United States. And, I, for one, think we need to do what Dennis Kucinich wants to do, which is create a Department of Peace at the cabinet level, and let's focus on peace, not war.
Absolutely. I think we're kind of getting off track a wee bit, but, I mean, regarding Hitler, some would say he was created more than just because of that treaty, that, as you mentioned earlier on, the military-industrial complex, the same as Bin Laden was a puppet of America at one point, especially when they were fighting in Afghanistan against the Russians, that to a degree Hitler was part of that as well, that Hitler was, to a certain degree, bought and paid for in the very early days by, I suppose, the military-industrial complex or the international banking elite.
Yeah, definitely.
And shameful too, if you look at some of the corporations. I mean, for example, I came across recently where IBM, they had systems in place for punching cards, and it was these cards that was used to track and number Jews that eventually brought them into concentration camps. Now, IBM at the time said that they had no idea what they were being used for, but I think it came to light maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago that the contract for servicing these machines, although IBM was a global company even back then, the actual contract for servicing was actually IBM in New York was doing it, so they were sending people over to do it. And the other thing was Coca-Cola at the time. Coca-Cola didn't want to be seen to be putting drinks into Germany, so they created a new brand called Fanta, which was put into the European and the German market. Again, it shows you the motives for profit.
Yeah, Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George Bush, was dealing with the Germans and the Americans. He was selling war material to both sides.
Yes.
And President Roosevelt, they brought charges against him for doing that, for trading with the enemy. Oh, and you raised this question about Osama bin Laden. The notion here was that we wanted to make Russia, the Soviet Union, bleed. So we were giving weapons or selling weapons to Iran. We were giving Iraq, that's the other war, I'm sorry. The one before that was when the Russians were in Afghanistan.
That's correct. Yes.
Yes, we were supplying weapons so they could shoot the Russian helicopters out of the sky. And this whole anti-Soviet Union position of the United States, I think, has been wrong. There's a wonderful book by J.W. Smith called Economic Democracy, The Political Struggle of the 21st Century. In there, he describes how most of the casualties in World War II were suffered by the Soviet Union. 85% of the casualties, because Hitler attacked the Soviet Union. And that's where the fighting, see, up until that point, he was just experiencing victories. You know, he had all of Europe, and it was a stupid thing for him to attack the Soviet Union, but, you know, the man wasn't, you know, well, let me not get into that. Well, we did not treat the Soviet Union very well after World War II. Right away, we made them be the enemy. And that is the consequence of capitalism. Capitalism, by its name, tells you it is one-sided. It favors capital. It will use labor to get out of labor whatever it can at the lowest possible wage. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was based on a more equitable distribution of resources. That's why socialism emerged at all, was as a reaction to the inequality created by capitalism. And for years, that's what I grew up with, was this anti-communism. I always wondered, what's wrong with capitalism, or with communism? They always say, oh, it's terrible, it's terrible. We used to run home from school to watch TV, the Army McCarthy hearings. There was going to be a communist who would jump up and say, yes, yes, I'm guilty, I'm a communist. Well, to be perfectly frank with you, Jesus Christ taught a philosophy that looks to me like the kind of sharing and humanism that is referred to by communism. But the name, just like now they talk about liberals as if liberals are somehow terrible because they're liberals. How we code the message, the words we use, are so powerful. And when those words are corrupted, so our thinking is corrupted. It's like profit. Profit is overcharge. And yet the word means progress. It means to advance. But that word has been taken and is used against us.
Yep. Absolutely. Now, just getting back, just before we go to the break, I want to just get back into the money system. I want you to probably lay it out now as best you can. In terms of the system we have today, what you're proposing is radical, but yet in some ways it's absolute common sense. It's ludicrous to think that in terms of distance and weights and time, etc., we have a global accepted measurement. So, for example, a kilometre is the same no matter where you go in the world. A kilo in weight's the same weight measurement anywhere in the world. And yet for money we have no form of global base measurement. So can you explain to the listeners the whys and hows of your suggestion to give money some kind of standard or base measurement?
Well, one thing people already know by intuition. People say all the time and money, save time, save money, invest time, invest money, waste time, waste money. That's telling us, that is telling us that time and money belong together. Okay, that's intuition. Now, I'm not basing what I say on intuition. I've looked at currency exchange rates. And if you take the gross domestic product of countries in the world, divided by the hours of work that produce that GDP, you get GDP per hour. If you then correlate is the technical term for it, the gross domestic product per hour with exchange rates as they exist today, and as they have existed since the IMF started publishing the data in 1948, the correlation is between 0.8 and 0.9, and it only goes to 1. So there's a very powerful correlation between the production of a country expressed per hour and the currency exchange rate. It's already there. I call it the center of gravity of currency exchange rates. It's what has to be because we're confined by time, as you know, because you're wanting now to take a break on time.
And I'll take that opportune moment that you presented me, Bob. And so, folks, we're going to go for a quick break, and we'll be back in a few moments with Dr. Bob Blaine.
You're listening to The Irish Side of the Moon. You can hear our new episodes every Monday on radiomedia.org and irishsideofthemoon.blogspot.com. You can also download episodes from iTunes, Stitcher, and many other sites. You can follow us on Twitter, you can join our Facebook group, and if you're already in the group, don't forget to invite your friends. If you have any ideas for future guests on the show, send an email to shane@theirishsideofthemoon.ie. We are Irish Side of the Moon. Freedom of information, personal empowerment.
And welcome back. You're listening to Irish Side of the Moon. Check us out at irishsideofthemoon.blogspot.com, or you can friend us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Irish Side of the Moon. We're joined this week by Dr. Bob Blaine, a professor of sociology who is also an activist for bringing about monetary reform by giving money a global standard or form of measurement. I'd encourage you to check out Bob's website. It's www.hourmoney.org. That's www.hourmoney.org. And just before the break, Bob was starting to break down how exactly we go about tying money into time as a form of measurement. Now, Bob, at the moment here in Ireland, we use the euro. And as you in the States, you use the dollar. Now, because of the many complicated systems we use to derive a value for, say, euro or dollar, and because of the use of a floating exchange, on any given day, 100 euros is worth so many dollars and vice versa, and this is constantly changing. So how do we initially work out the number of dollars we get for an hour compared to, say, the number of euros we get for an hour? And if we work out, say, for example, an hour euro, where 40 of our euros at the moment equals an hour's work, and say you have $50 for an hour's work in America, does that become a fixed system at that stage then?
Yes, that becomes the exchange rate, the GDP per hour of your country and every other country is the equation. That's the equal. Right now, again, gross domestic product is taken as a measure of the productivity of a country, and there's not really very good grounds for doing that. What the GDP is the summation of the prices of everything produced in the country in a given year. It's a measure of price. So if you understand GDP to tell you the price level of the country, not the value produced. If you want to know the value of what is produced, look at what is produced. What's the value of food? What's the value of housing? What's the value of health care? That's how you find out value. If you want price, you look at what it sells for. And what all of us want is we want the most value for the lowest price, which tells you price and value are not the same thing. Economists of the capitalist stripe want you to think that price reflects value. Well, it's certainly related to value because you know you're going to have to pay the price to get the value you want, but every one of us would like the lowest price and the highest value, which tells you they're different. So if you take GDP to represent the price level in a country, what we can do, you see, what I like about this is it does not require any confiscation of anybody's property. It doesn't require any disruption in what is happening. All it requires is a conversion. You take your GDP per hour, and that equates to the GDP per hour for every other country. You can estimate the work time price of everything in your economy just by dividing everything by your GDP per hour. The data that I have in front of me puts the euro at approximately 33 euros per hour, 32.6 per hour. So if you divided everything in your economy by 33, that would immediately convert everything to hours.
Okay.
It's just like when we converted, when you converted 2 euros from your previous currency. It was a matter of converting mathematically, making a division and understanding, well, when you take the euros, they're going to exchange at that conversion value. So we would take our GDP per hour everywhere in the world, and I'd love for the IMF to do it if we could break them away from being the collectors of interest on debt and make them do the job they're supposed to do, which is set the exchange rates in a fair and equitable way for everyone. We could declare that GDP per hour, the exchange rate for all currencies in the world. That would mean we wouldn't be changing anybody's currency. We wouldn't be taking anything away from anybody. We would just be expressing our prices in time.
Okay.
Once
sorry, go on ahead.
Yeah.
Go on ahead. You're making a point.
Then begins the process of making adjustments in the light of what those values are.
Okay. Now, I think you said there the euro would work out roughly 33 euros per hour going at the exchange rate at the moment. Now, say for example a country increases or decreases, and at the moment with the competition model we have this crazy situation that for countries to survive they constantly there's exponential growth going on. In a world with finite amount of resources, we have this model that each year exponentially each nation on this planet has to produce more and more and more. Now, say for example in Ireland, or say with the Eurozone at the moment, if their GDP goes up, does the 33 euros per hour, does that go up to reflect that? Or if it goes down, does it go down to reflect that? Or is that tied in? Once you initially do the 33 euros an hour, that's what it becomes.
Oh, no, you can make the adjustment every year based on the same calculation. Now, on the matter of growth, that's a capitalist thing. It flies in the face of the realities that we see all around us. There are countries in the world that have too much. There are countries in the world that have too little. The ones that have too little, their GDP needs to go up so you can supply people. Their production needs to go up so they can supply people with the things they need. The places that are overproducing need to reduce production. In the United States, we need to reduce production. This notion that we got to grow, that's crazy. That's, again, where our thinking has been distorted by thinking solely in terms of making money. We need to make wealth, and wealth is well-being. It isn't money. It's having food and shelter and all these good things. We should stop judging our production by GDP. Call that our price. We don't want our price to keep going up. We want our price to come down. That means we want our GDP to come down. That doesn't mean going into poverty. There's a huge portion of GDP that we can improve, not grow. See, the fundamental difference between growth and improvement. Every year, in our country now, we throw away millions of automobiles every year. That's waste.
Yep.
That's not smart. And all the energy it takes to produce an automobile, we throw it in the trash. Okay, let's say we recycle it. Well, that's better than just throwing it away, but it's not as good as making it to last for a very long time. And that's what we need to do. In terms of unemployment, what we should be doing is reducing the work week by the rate of unemployment. That will absorb the unemployed. The book I cited, well, it's a different book but the same author, J.W. Smith, The World's Wasted Wealth. He points out that what has happened is the necessary work has been going down. After you build a house, you don't have to build a house again. You can build another house, but the house you built is built. So that necessary work is done. What we have done in order to continue to receive an income is we do a lot of unnecessary work because we haven't redistributed the remaining necessary work by reducing the work week by the rate of unemployment. That's what we need to do, not grow the economy. It's already obscenely obese.
I've seen a few commentators suggest, more of a job sharing role, that people might work a couple hours a week and do it like that there. And it's also crazy to think too. I mean, because as the world becomes technologically more advanced, when you build a house today, in theory you should be able to get longer out of it than if you build a house, say, 50 or 60 years ago. So the need for reproducing these things is going down as well. Now, fair enough, you have to factor into the population growth and stuff like that there, but still, it's going down. But because of, I think, two things: because of the competition model for one, but also because of the nature of our money system, and it's a debt-based money system whereby principal is only ever created with interest applied afterwards. The people need to keep producing today. Nations need to keep producing more and more to try to pay off the existing, or to pay off even the interest on the debt alone, let alone the principal of the debt.
Yeah, you want to talk about the debt, huh? That's a yeah. Well, that's another part. You know, when you get paid your money, that's supposed to be your pay. The notion that you can take that and put it somewhere and it's going to keep growing through interest compounding on it, that goes back to the commodity concept of money. It's thinking that your money is like corn. Oh, I'll put it in the bank and it will grow. That's not what it's going to do. It's a record of what you have been paid for the work you've done. What each of us, should expect is to receive that money back at the same value it was when we put it in the bank. Not, oh, I put in 1,000 and now I got 1,500. When they talk about growing the economy today, we need growth, they're not really talking about commodities. They're talking about income. You hear it from Wall Street, oh, the economy's got to grow. What they're saying is our income has to grow. We want to have more money this year than we had last year.
Yes.
But
it does, Bob, to a degree tie into commodities and that, because to increase one's wealth or one's wage from last year, you're going to eat up and use even more commodities in the sense of, say, oil and food and precious metals and stuff like that. So there is a tie or a link there as well, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. And you know, I don't know how that 33 euros per hour sounds to you, because I'm not familiar with the prices in Ireland. But
well, the minimum wage was €8, and I think it was 65 or 75, and they've taken €1 off that now as part of the austerity measures implemented in the last budget. So it's down to about $7.50 or $7.65 an hour at the moment. Now that's the minimum wage.
yes. And see how low that is compared to what the production of Ireland is at 33 euros per hour? What would that sound like for skilled labor per hour, 33 euros per hour for skilled labor?
That would still sound pretty healthy. Now, fair enough, you have some professional services where they'll charge anywhere from maybe 40, 50 to €100 an hour, and when you go into things then like the legal profession, or if you go into the medical profession, I mean, if you even go into politicians as an example, I mean, these guys is bringing in €100,000 a year. Yeah, they're paying tax on it. But I mean, our Dáil, I know you have two houses in America, but our Dáil, like our national parliament, I mean, these guys, out of a 365-day year, these guys might only sit 120 or 160 days of that there. And it's crazy. So when you work it out like that, Bob, when you go back into the hours spent and stuff like that, it's crazy. But yeah, 33 euros an hour would still seem pretty reasonable.
See, that I think should be the national standard wage for skilled labor. We need that kind of a standard. Minimum isn't doing it for us, as you know, and the same thing is true in the United States. Our minimum wage is something like $6 an hour, and our GDP is $50 an hour. And $50 an hour would be pretty good for skilled labor. With people able to negotiate variations around it, that's a normal thing with money. The other effect, we've had CEOs who took $100 million bonus in 1 year. If you were to make $50 an hour, 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, you'd make $100,000 in 1 year. That'd be 1 year. To make 1 million would take you 10 years. To make 10 million would take you 100 years. To make $100 million would take 1,000 years at $50 an hour. In other words, converting these numbers allows us to see in real terms how much money we're talking about. People in this country, we have lotteries that are $300 million, and the only concern people have is that they didn't win, without realizing that's 3,000 years at $50 an hour.
It shows the absolute obscenity of the way the system actually works.
Yes.
I mean, I think, Bob, if you look at some of the greatest minds of the last hundreds, even possibly the last maybe 1,000 years, if you look at people we all look up to and admire in terms of any system or any discipline, some of the people who's contributed the most to the world have done it out of the love for what they're doing. We have this system and day where we're actually creating a society of greed and of that mentality that people can only be rewarded through monetary means. People don't actually work in professions that they want to work in and be inspired in and contribute to the world. People work in jobs that they have no interest in at all because if they bring in this money thing. I mean, again, to organise a civilised society, the way we're doing it at the moment, in my opinion, and it's only my opinion, seems to be the absolute worst, most insane way of doing things.
Oh, I agree. They talk about incentive, and they'll say, we have to pay these CEOs all that money because of incentive. Well, why would anybody go to work for a minimum wage if it takes $1 million to get somebody to get up and go to a meeting? What we need to do is give people incentives to work, not incentives to figure out ways to get other people to do their work for them.
Yes.
Which has happened. Yeah. That's why I like that phrase, share the work, share the wealth. That's real economics.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Now, in terms of your system, how would that address problems with inflation? Because, I mean, one of the things at the moment why wages have to increase is because as the money supply expands, the value actually goes down over a period of time. I know you've heard the arguments yourself, but just for the listeners out there, so we have this constant battle with inflation, and as prices rise, then your wage has to rise to keep up with that. In terms of our money, how would that affect the prices of goods and services in the marketplace?
The reality of prices is that the real price of things goes down. I'm thinking of my first computer. It cost me $3,000, and it had 48K. I thought I'd never need more. The one I have now, I think I've paid $500 for it, and it has gigabytes and all that RAM. Who knows? I can't quote all the numbers. They're so big. The real price of everything is coming down. If we were setting price by time, the first thing we would notice is where wages are way out of alignment. That is, you got a CEO getting 1,000 years in 1 year. You got somebody else getting paid 10% of an hour per hour. So you get those adjustments. Once we get that and we begin to understand the price of a home should be the work time required to produce it. The price of a loan, work time to produce it. So what we would see is prices coming down, and we would see the value of any money that we have put in the bank go up, not because of inflation, but because we're getting better at producing things cheaper.
Okay, let me jump in there. I want to give you an example because that's one of the things that put me off time banking. I know what you're proposing is different to time banking, but one of the things I found with time banking is, see, in terms of services, for example, I might spend 2 hours painting your house, and in return, you'll do something for me. Maybe you might do my garden, or if you don't have a skill set that you can contribute to what I need, if there's a time banking community in place, someone else will come and put in 2 hours and the system evens itself out. And it seems to work fantastic for that. But when you go onto products and go onto, especially things like, say, milk, a carton of milk or a loaf of bread or a pound of sugar, how would your system cater for the likes of that? You know, something where you're paying maybe $1 at the moment for a carton of milk, or you're paying €1 for a loaf of bread.
Yeah. The hour would be in 100 cents. Okay, so we keep it decimal. We wouldn't use 60 minutes. We'd use 100 cents. So if you looked at a loaf of bread, it'd probably cost you 3 cents.
Okay.
Okay? Because, bread is made in these huge amounts. The issue I thought you were going to raise is what about the person that's like the brain surgeon, okay? Oh, boy, he's saving your life. He's had a lot of training. There's very expensive equipment, all that sort of thing. My answer to that is take it all into account. Absolutely. Put everything on the table. Pay, and even give him a bonus. Let's say he's in the operating room for 3 hours doing this very delicate thing. Pay him for the whole day. If you want, pay him for the week. What we want to get away from is where, that $100 million, I think if you put that per hour, it's $50,000 an hour.
Right.
Those kind of things. If the doctor came in and he said, well, you have this illness and it's going to take a lot to cure you. I have to operate.
Right.
And I'm going to charge you 10 years.
Yes.
I mean, you're going to have to really challenge that. Wait a minute, 10 years? Why so much? Today, if they say $100,000, you don't have an answer. You can't object. You just wonder, gosh, that's an awful lot. How am I ever going to pay? But if it's in time, we all have a standard we all understand.
Well, that's what I kind of love about your system as well, because it brings back more equality to the system. I mean, if someone's bald, we're taught that, everybody's born equally and stuff like that, but when you look at the reality that someone like a Bill Gates, fair enough, he's contributed a lot in terms of the computer world, but I would argue the case he's probably stifled growth as well, because through the monopoly of say, Microsoft, he's killed off so much competition. I think the world would be better served with, say, 100 or 1,000 Microsofts, as opposed to one big mammoth of what Microsoft is today.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I'm telling you a number of different things we could do. My main objective is to get the hour on money, because I think that will straighten everything else out. However, I've also said reduce the work week by the rate of unemployment. There's another very simple thing. Put a cap at the top. You can only make so much. And a reasonable limit is 100 years of income, because human nature, our physical nature, limits us to 100 years of life. Why not limit us to 100 years of income? Now, as by the calculation I gave you a few minutes ago, that's $10 million. What that would say is, when you get to $10 million, retire. You can continue to work. Just work for free. Let somebody else have the job. You've got more than enough. Nobody works 100 years.
So would the 10 million be for a lifetime's wage?
Yes, that would be your lifetime. You're shut off now. You've got enough. Now, if Bill Gates had done that, I'm sure he would have still been motivated to do what he did. Build Microsoft. He wasn't motivated by billions of dollars. He was motivated by the opportunity. He saw that there was an opening here for building a language to make computers easier to use, and he pursued that. And he was right on, and people rewarded him for it, and we paid a fortune for these software things. They keep coming out and charging a fortune more, way beyond what they should be. Like
something, we might have even had a better Bill Gates, because if it was limited to that amount, he had been competing with a lot more people, which might have brought out more in him. And I say competing in the sense that he had been trying, with his passion for what he'd done, he had been trying to improve his product all the time. Whereas now at the moment, with the amount of wealth and the amount of money as opposed to wealth they've brought on, they just buy out competition, they just kill competition.
Yes.
They kill. Do you know what? No. Do you know what it is? It's not even competition. I hate to use the word competition. They kill creativity. They kill creativity in other people.
Yeah. Yeah. What's happening is, we get a few superstars, but look at all the people who never get to be a star, who would be stars if they had the opportunity. You can apply that to movie actors. You can apply that to sports people, basketball players, football players, whatever, because we have a few people making these huge amounts of money. All these other people never get a chance.
Okay, quick question, because we're getting towards the end of the interview. And I want to just go into a couple other things very quickly. Just on the wage, why not have a fixed wage for everybody if that's the case? Why not have true equality in the sense that people's rewarded from achieving and learning and gaining like that there, as opposed to monetary rewards, and maybe give them other rewards outside of monetary rewards? Why not have a cap on what everybody earns and keep it the same? I think it's not a great example, but I think Cuba, in terms of their public service, everybody's on a fixed wage.
Well, there's circumstances. We have the principle of being paid time and a half and double time. Let's say you're working on a holiday, or you're working at night, or you're doing something particularly dangerous. I don't have any problem with minor variations based upon circumstances, and they're really not so minor. I mean, somebody getting paid double time, it's $100 an hour, based on what we're saying. So
Okay.
I would not forbid variations, but I think what will happen is that people, the inequalities would reduce, and we'd end up pretty close to each other. But let's say I'm hiring somebody to work in my restaurant, and I might, compared to the chef, I might say, okay, I'm going to pay you half-time. You're new. Let me see how you work out. Once you get to be good at your job, I'll pay you full-time. Or the chef who's been there for several years say, I'm going to pay you double time. I would not say people cannot do that. I would this is true free market, but it's free market, fair market. It says decide, but decide with a meaningful measure, something that everybody understands. This is how we produce. We work, we measure our work by the hour. There are circumstances that would justify variations, less or more, but not the kind of absurd multiples we're seeing today.
Absolutely. Now, a couple of challenging questions. Some of your critics would argue that it is competition that has brought us the industrial age and now the technological age, that well-meaning notions of mass cooperation is nothing more than just that, well-meaning but misguided. How would you address that viewpoint?
I don't think it's factually correct. If you look at people producing automobiles, they're cooperating. Why do companies want to buy up other companies? So they can bring cooperation fully under the same management. John Kenneth Galbraith made the point in his book Industrial Society, I think it was called, where that's the goal, is to bring things into cooperation. Now, if you want to produce something that you think is better than what somebody else is producing, go ahead. In that sense, we want a market. We want people to be able to come forward with new products. Nothing against that. And, we don't want to be horse and buggy around, but we want cars that run better. We don't want to have to reproduce them over and over again. There's
Absolutely.
nothing to prevent innovation. We just want fairness, fair, equitable. You see, those words, equality, equitable. The word equality originates from the word quality and E. The E means out of. True equality is people being treated according to their nature, according to who they are and what they are. And if I'm going to exert myself, let's say I tell my boss, hey, today, I want the day off. I want a longer weekend. I'll work harder today, and then give me tomorrow off.
Okay.
Fine.
But see
let people have a choice.
Okay, but see the example you give there. say a company buying another company out. Now, I'm nitpicking or splitting hairs, or I'm being simplistic here. Is that not part of the problem, Bert? I mean, if you look back, say, in the United States as an example where you're based, like, say 50, 60 years ago, you had media companies that you had probably 30, 40 different big media companies owned by themselves. Today, you have every company falling under maybe 3 or 4 owners or mother companies or parent companies. If you look at Steel, for example, I think Steel in America now, they're down to maybe 2 owners that own all the other wee private ones. Does that, to a degree, not create then an elitist in a way too, and that sets agendas and stuff like that there?
It's terrible. It's terrible. It's the way it works under the present money system, because they're absorbing other companies not to make the work, not to coordinate the work more effectively, but to be able to control the market so they can raise the price and suck as much out of everybody as they possibly can. Whereas, you see, a monopoly is not necessarily a bad thing. It is a bad thing if the people running it are doing it solely for the purpose of getting as much money for themselves as they can. If, on the other hand, like our local government, my town government, for example, it's the only government we have. You know, there's not 2 town governments. There's 1 town government, and that's a good thing. So there are circumstances where monopoly is the proper way to organize. You don't want a bunch of private companies developing the road system, each making their own road system, and nothing coordinates, nothing links up. There are circumstances where you need to have people working together on large-scale projects so everything fits together. What we got to take away from that is the motivation to hoard. Hoard. That's another word for capitalism. Capitalism says hoard. Get as much as you can. And that's what happens in our politics, too. They win an election, and the first thing they want to do is get everything they can for themselves.
Yeah.
We want to limit income so that kind of hoarding doesn't happen. Share the work, share the wealth.
There was, and I shouldn't even mention this because I forget the guy's name, he was a German economist. He spent some time in, I think it was Argentina, back in the 20s and the 30s. Now, he came up with a hypothesis for free money, and basically the way it was going to work as well is the longer you held money, the more value you actually lost on it. So what it was constantly encouraging was that money to be spent in the economy, that you can't, just when you mentioned hoarding there. Have you ever come across that?
Yes, I think his name was Gesell. I may be wrong. G-E-S-E-L-L. I'm not sure about that. But yeah, you know, that's again an effort to deal with the problem. Yeah. It's so widespread that people are not realizing that the money does not have a definition. It's a word without a definition. If we can get that across, it needs a definition. Just like the meter has a definition. It's the length of a stick. The clock, the hour has a definition. You see it on the clock. That's why we call it o'clock.
Yes.
So we can
absolutely. Now, just one other point of contention, just when we're on it. Some people would argue too that although our current money system is far from perfect, it is the best available to serve 21st century economies. That, for one, this is the result of hundreds of years of progress with input from some of the greatest minds that ever lived, and 2, that the competition or the capitalist model adopted globally today by default weeds out unrealistic systems, and what you're left with is the most effective and efficient way of doing things. How would you respond to those points?
I have a game. It's called Cooperation, a Wealth of Nations game. I talk about it on my website, or I show it on my website. You can compare different systems with that.
Bob, you're a mind reader as well, because that was my next question.
Oh. So regardless of what I say, you can play this game. It's available on the computer as well, and see different ways of organizing an economy and what are the pluses and the minuses. And the autonomy version is all the pluses. You said that the system has evolved, and yes, there have been very positive elements. But I would say about money, that money is in a state of arrested development. and it's probably been in that state for at least 100 years. 100 years or more ago, they were trying to find a unit to define money. When they failed to do it, Benjamin Franklin, 1729, said time is the proper measure of price. Adam Smith starts The Wealth of Nations with the three words, the annual labor. And then he goes on and says it's the purchasing power of a nation. That's work time. He rejected work time in individual cases, and he shouldn't have done that, but he did. We need to bring money up to date with the rest. And capitalism is a good system in the sense that it's a money system. It's a bad system with money that is not properly defined so that people get the correct amount of money when they work and pay the correct price when they buy things.
Okay, yeah. I would agree with that. Now, a big motivation for us doing Irish Side of the Moon is personal empowerment. So for people listening to the show, what action can they take today or over the coming days to help your campaign for setting time and money together, for using time as the measurement of money?
Yeah, what I would suggest is for themselves, take that 33 euros per hour and use it to enlighten their understanding of the prices that they're dealing with right now, with minimum wage, with salaries people are receiving, so they can see where things are very badly out of adjustment. With that enlightenment, and I love that word, put the light on, they can then see ways that they might be able to influence people to, for example, establish a national standard for skilled labor at 33 euros per hour. Put some pressure on these top-level salaries. You know, organize around that. CEOs should not be taking all that money. They're way, way, way beyond reason. We need to bring things within reason. So you can act in those ways within your own context.
Okay, now you've said it a couple of times regarding skilled labour. And for then, say, unskilled or semi-skilled labour, I mean, again, do they move up to the 33?
I would say no. That when you say semi-skilled, you're saying half-skilled. Well, pay them half the rate.
Okay.
But you don't need to be terribly harsh about it. But let's say somebody comes in and you're just hiring them. We have to make judgments about what is skilled, what is unskilled, what is extra super skilled, and pay people accordingly in a reasonable way. We must bring reason back into economics, and with reason comes ethics, comes fairness, comes understanding that I can either help you to have a good life, a prosperous life at a fair wage, or I can be afraid of you all my life because you're underpaid, you're undereducated, you're overworked, and you hate me even though you don't know me. We want everybody to do well because otherwise we end up having to support the people not doing well, either because they want to take it away from us or because they're sick and they need help and they need subsidies of one kind or another. Let's share the work and share the wealth so we can all do well.
Okay, and I just want to expand on the previous question, and this will be the final question. As a professor, you have a reputation to uphold, but yet you've written books, you've written countless articles, and you've given lectures. Now that takes courage and drive because you're coming out of your professor of sociology to do that. So for people listening to this show who may want to take action for some causes, any cause, or maybe for some changes in their personal lives, can you offer them any advice or encouragement from the lessons and experiences that you've learned in your own life?
Well, there's one thing I haven't told you, but I have lost 3 sons. One died when he was 5, and one died when he was 18, and one died when he was 19.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Yeah, what I learned from that is how precious life is. And we need to take action while we live and while we can. And losing them has given me the courage to speak out and to insist that at least I be heard. and to promote, Jesus. I mentioned Jesus early on, and he still inspires me. My beliefs about religion are very different than they were when I was a child, but I have a great deal of admiration for Jesus and the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, the things he had to say about the meek shall inherit the earth and all of that. Take courage, work for what is good. John Adams gave this advice to his son. Be good and do good. That's where I stand.
Well, I think you're a great example to us all. I mean, with such tragic circumstances, I mean, to turn that into a positive, it's not easy to do. And when people say it, they have an experience, sometimes it can come across as maybe condescending, but I mean it sincerely. I mean, to take action out of that there is something to be admired.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing.
Well, you're very welcome. Dr. Bob Lane, it's been an absolute honor speaking to you. I've really, really enjoyed it. Have you any closing words?
Share the work, share the wealth.
Fantastic. For everybody listening, again, I would encourage you to go to Dr. Bob's website. It's www.hour, as in monetary term, money.org, or sorry, as in time, .org. So that's www.hourmoney.org. Dr. Bob, thank you.
Thank you, Shane.
Wow, it's mind-numbing. It's depressing, really, when you think about it, that in the year 2011, this is how we organise or not organise our monetary system. It's absolutely crazy. And people need to begin to start questioning why. Why is this system in place with all the technological advancements we made in the last couple of 100 years, and more specifically in the last 50 to 60 years? To have such a system in place just doesn't make sense, folks. And even going by the World Bank's own figures, I'm going back to the Bernard Littare show. Now I'm paraphrasing, the numbers might just be exactly accurate, but it gives you an idea. Like in the last 25 to 30 years, there's been 80 to 90 banking crises around the world. In the same period of time, there's been 170, 180 financial crises around the world. This system just doesn't work. So you have to ask, why is it still in place? Whose interest has been best served by this? And I'll tell you now, it's not the millions dying from starvation. It's not the millions of people working 2 or 3 jobs to try to keep a roof over their head and to keep food on the table and support their family. It's not the millions trying to get into hospitals to get various treatments for conditions and diseases. I think it's fair to say that this system does not serve the best interests of the majority of the population, and we need to change it, and we need to change it radically. Not the kind of stuff that you hear politicians discussing at the moment and the banking regulatory authorities discussing at the moment. No, we need fundamental change. I mean, again, I'm harping back over old information here, but to think that a kilometre would be a different measurement of distance depending on what country in the world you go to, it's just absolute craziness. Money needs some kind of standard to derive a value for it. And I know there's a lot of people who advocate gold, but again, if you think of it like this here, the vast majority of gold is controlled by the current cartel that controls the current monetary system. It would still be used to create the same injustices. Gold's extremely hard to get at, which ties into the whole thing, this modern paradigm with regards to money, that money derives its value from scarcity, and that's just bullshit. It's not that at all. We really need to bring about radical change, and Dr. Bob has a lot of good ideas worth exploring a wee bit more. Now, quickly moving on, next week's show is going to be with Jonathan Gray. Jonathan's website is www.beforeus.com, and Jonathan's going to be discussing archaeology and some of the discrepancies he's discovered at various sites around the world. It should make a very interesting show. Very quickly, I'd like to also plug our own blog site, irishsideofthemoon.blogspot.com. There you get a back catalogue of all our shows. And again, if you're on Facebook, search for Irish Side of the Moon. Like us and get all your friends to like us. So for myself, Michael, Gabriel and Tommy, good night.
We are Irish Side of the Moon. Freedom of information, personal empowerment. The Irish Side of the Moon.
I still have a dream.
This is just a ride.
change it anytime we want. It's only a choice. No effort, no work, no job, no savings of money. A choice right now between fear and love. Love, 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 love.
Freedom of information, personal empowerment, the Irish side of the moon.